And so if you want to irrefutably connect a transaction to a person actually doing it, the only way really is with biometrics, because everything else essentially can be and has been circumvented by fraudsters. They can take over a device, they can take over a session, they can steal your password, which we know they do every day. They can use your identity that's stolen in breaches. By the way, I think at my last count, there were 72 billion personal records stolen in the last 5 years. So fraudsters use these records to impersonate people.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Frontier Talk, the world's first podcast on decentralized identity. I'm Raj Hegde, and in this podcast, we explore the intersection of identity, technology, and people. My guest on the pod today is a biometrics veteran who has a solid track record of building customer-first relationships in a privacy-first world. What makes her feel relevant? It was a defining question that convinced her to forego a career in foreign policy and venture into uncharted startup land. How can we deploy biometrics responsibly? Since the early days of the internet, she has explored digital identity through the lens of biometrics and has passionately fought for data protection policies that are finally becoming a reality. Biometrics, as you know, is a sensitive type of data, and deploying them effectively requires a solid understanding of not just privacy, but also societal usage. Here to share her take on how decentralized biometrics can help businesses build trust-based relationships with their customers, Frances Zelazny, co-founder and CEO of Anonybit.
Hi, Rajan. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome to the pod, Frances. Let's start off by exploring your journey so far. How were you introduced to the field of biometrics, and what aspects of biometrics are you working on?
So I've been in this industry for over 20 years. I actually got into it by mistake. I originally thought I would be some ambassador somewhere around the world trying to make peace, make the world a better place. And
Right.
Actually, I found a better way to do that, in my opinion, through my skill set. We need the diplomats, but my focus is on using technology to make the world a better place. And I got involved in biometrics really as an accidental journey among various startups that I had been involved in. And I was intrigued by the technology as a way to help protect people.
Right.
And to protect their identity and enable them to transact and be more effective in what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And in fact, along the way, one of the most passionate areas that I had was around privacy, enabling people, and also using this technology to promote and enhance social and economic development. So I got involved in very, very interesting projects and programs over the years, as you know.
Wow, that is some journey. For our audience, could you perhaps take a step back and summarize what exactly are biometrics and what are the processes of a traditional biometric system?
So biometrics are essentially mathematical representations of your physical or behavioral attributes. Mm-hmm. Your fingerprint, your face, your iris. These are the traditional physical biometrics that we've come to know and use in our daily lives. And there are also other biometrics that are considered behavioral. Some are like your voice or the way you walk or the way you type. And most recently within that class, there are advanced behavioral analytic technologies that analyze the way you input information and other types of behaviors that you exhibit when you use an application or a device that make you you.
Great explanation there, short and simple. You've seen the industry evolve from its infancy stages to what it has become today. We are witnessing a number of government and private organizations that are experimenting with biometrics and are adopting biometrics to not just identify people, but also verify their identities, be it a fingertip, a face scan, or even an iris scan for that matter. What, in your opinion, were the biggest inflection points that put biometrics on the map?
Oh, this is an industry that has gone through a lot. I would say the first major inflection point was actually 9/11, where it was recognized that there are technologies that could help really identify the bad guys. And I would say that was the first major moment for this industry and facial recognition in particular. And actually, we might want to backtrack to that, because about 6 months to a year before 9/11, there were a lot of other things going on in the industry with regards to privacy.
Right.
And then after 9/11, the pendulum swung the other way and stayed there for quite some time as people were afraid of the terrorist activity and how you can identify and predict what will happen across borders, within borders. And then the second, I would say, major inflection point for the industry was Apple's adoption of the Touch ID on the phone.
Right.
And that put biometrics in the hands of the everyday consumer. And we can thank my friend Scott Moody, who founded Authentic, the company that Apple ultimately acquired to do that. But that was a huge pivotal moment for the entire industry. It was the first time that people really thought about, using their fingerprint to log into their device or to do a transaction.
Right.
Even though, we'd been talking about this for years. Mm-hmm. And then, the evolution of that, the Face ID, which became much more, brought it even more home. And globally, around that time, India adopted their national ID framework, which actually is considered to be, in many ways, it's not perfect, but in many ways is considered a standard for the developing world and how to manage identity, distribute social services, essentially take care of the citizenry. And we saw that in play in other countries. In Pakistan, a few years after that, there was a big natural disaster, and they used biometrics to distribute emergency aid to people. And then you saw other countries. Today, Nigeria has a biometric credit card national ID. And we see, other countries that are distributing pensions and really using it as really foundational. And that's playing out in many ways today with the vaccine, passport, which I'm sure we'll get to. But, back to my career and the inflection points. One of the most interesting projects that I got involved in over the years was the use of biometrics to create a system for farmers in Africa to get aid to provide genetically modified seed based on the yields of their crops. Once they were biometrically enabled, they could go to banks and get microloans and things like this. So really the foundational, once biometrics were out there, it really became the foundational for many, many, many programs. And I think lastly, COVID in the last year or so really highlighted the need for remote identification, whether it was workforce operating from home, whether it was the explosion of e-commerce and transacting, and all of the fraud that, came about because of weak authentication. I think, everything together really highlighted and pushed biometrics to the forefront once again.
One thing that has always intrigued me, for that matter, is the permanence of biometrics. So, do biometric features remain constant over time? As I get older, I might get more wrinkly, and the orientation of my face might actually change just a bit. So I was just wondering if biometric systems can actually recognize me from a prior scan.
Yeah. So first of all, Raj, forever young. Don't worry about the wrinkles.
Fingers crossed. Yeah.
So one of the main benefits of biometrics is their permanence. Is their irrefutability, and the fact that it's really the only link between a person and their physical being. Especially as we have more and more remote interactions, self-service interactions, fast track, and whatnot. Some technologies are physically more permanent than others. Some are naturally inclined to change. Obviously, your facial appearance, your behavioral attributes. But these technologies have improved over the years, both in terms of accommodating these changes and second, in terms of recognizing the differences and improving algorithms to detect those changes and still ensure that a person is who they are, even if they're wearing glasses or they change their hair. These are problems actually that were solved quite some time ago, and now, interestingly enough, COVID presented another challenge, which was not about the wrinkles, but it was about, face masks. And even that, the industry has worked extremely hard to overcome. And you do see algorithms and technologies, even facial technologies that can properly identify and detect people, even if they're wearing a mask, which is obviously very important as we enter reopening phase, right? To allow people to enter facilities, travel in airports where they are going to be expected. So the answer is we have made a lot of strides, and the systems are able to recognize those changes.
Fingers crossed, Frances. I hope your words actually come true in this case. So I think that's a great segue to actually explore the intersection of identity and biometrics, particularly in the times we're living in today. Identity, as you might know, is an innately physical concept. Do biometrics effectively anchor digital mechanisms to physical identity?
So it's actually a great question, especially for people that are thinking about zero trust and, how do you, really identify people, and how do you ensure that somebody really is who they are? A lot of identity frameworks today have been based on, up until now, have been based on pointers or derivatives or risk associations. Like location, like device, and other kinds of indicators, usage patterns, behavioral analytics, which is a type of usage analytics. How long, how often, the activities that people do. So based on all of these pointers, I would say if you're not using a biometric, these are all risk type of indicators of whether a person is who they claim to be. But at the end of the day, none of those are the actual person. And so if you want to irrefutably connect a transaction to a person actually doing it, the only way really is with biometrics, because everything else essentially can be and has been circumvented by fraudsters. They can take over a device, they can take over a session, they can steal your password, which we know they do every day. They can use your identity that's stolen in breaches. By the way, there's, I think at my last count, there were 72 billion personal records stolen in the last 5 years. So fraudsters use these records to impersonate people. And, as a consumer, as a citizen, I want to make sure that nobody's impersonating me, and all of these other things are just, bits of information that other people can use to pretend that they're me.
We are currently living in unprecedented times where the explosion of personal information is transforming tech, business, and society. And as a result, the notion of identity as such is changing. What was once considered to be a singular concept has now converted to plurality. So my question to you is, can biometrics actually play a role in unifying multiple identities?
So I think biometrics in a lot of ways is central to that unification. There are different ways to confer an identity credential or an identity framework. But as the India example shows, and you see this in other national ID schemes, it's really one record, one identity, and then from there you can spin off whatever other applications, use cases, credentials ultimately that you need. There is also a fear which we saw in U.S. driver's licenses here, where people will apply, if you're not using a biometric, people will apply for a driver's license under multiple identities. Then you have the problem of, I use Apple Pay all the time, but I'm very well aware that I could take your credit card or that you could take my credit card and put it on your phone with your biometrics and nobody would know. So at the end of the day, if there's no way to really bind that identity to the biometric, to the person, then it's not a strong identity.
Right. And just to add to that, the current industry paradigm, as you might know, is to basically store sensitive data in centralized honeypots. And the implications of this are, unfortunately, irreversible data breaches. The biggest example being the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal. On a state level, the hack of the Office of Personnel Management, where literally the personal identifiable information of millions of people were actually compromised. So my question to you is, what is the significance of such a data breach? Why should people actually care? And what actually happens when a biometric is compromised?
So it actually has happened.
Right.
This is not a theoretical question. And, governments today, government agencies, entities, have databases, not just of biometrics, but a lot of other, personal information, because it's their responsibility to, back to what we were saying in the beginning, to transact and manage and to ensure the integrity of the other systems that derive from them. So it's not that they don't have a need for personal information. The question is, how do you manage it in a way that is secure and that doesn't, lead to downstream other identity, problem? Right. So I think that's important, to understand. We're not. I think that there is a need for governments to, for example, issue passports. We need passports for travel. And that means that somebody is creating a passport system and is distributing passports. Now we see verifiable credentials, picking up steam. There's a need for that because people need to show these credentials in different places. So then the question becomes, how do you manage all of this information to minimize the chances of these irreversible breaches and the chances of people's personal information, which, in my mind, biometrics is the most sensitive of all. And that really becomes the question. So around the central honeypots, it's primarily because up until now, technologies were based on, or biometrics and even, personal data frameworks were based on on the notion that, everything had to be in one place. And from a biometrics perspective, we can talk about why. But as we've seen with different DID and other verifiable credential frameworks now, with blockchain and others, that it is not necessarily always required to have a central honeypot. With biometrics in particular, that limitation, we could take a step back, but with biometrics, there were always two choices. You either store the biometric in a database, in a central honeypot, as you say, to protect it, or you put the template locally. We see credit cards that have biometric templates stored on the card. There were technologies, these are match-on-card technologies. And then it became the biometrics that were stored on devices, on the phones. Right. And the reason for that is that the template, the biometric, the mathematical representation of that biometric always had to reside in a holistic form in one place for matching. And the reason is that the way the template is established is that you extract the features and then you measure the distances between the features in order to come up with that mathematical representation. And if you actually try to decentralize that template, you could do it. You could definitely decentralize that template. But the problem becomes when you have to do the matching, because you needed everything back together again in order to do that computation. And that's why you see the choices of either central honeypots or these localized storage mechanism of these individual templates. So as long as everything was there, you could actually do a match. And then with the central honeypots, you're at the risk of a breach. With the device-based approach, you're at a risk of a hacker or fraudster just circumventing the entire process because it's not bound to any rooted identity. So those when you ask about the state of biometrics, essentially has become a choice between trading off the security apparatus, if you will, of a centralized system where you don't really necessarily have privacy, or the privacy framework of a device approach, but you miss out on the security framework within the whole system. Right. So that's been the state of play.
And so what's the end game here? Is there an alternative means to ensure someone is whom they claim to be without relying on centralized honeypots or device-based biometrics?
So the what we've seen today are breakthroughs in multi-party computing and in that leverage biometrics where you actually don't have those limitations. You don't need to choose between a central honeypot or a device-based approach in order to provide both privacy and security. And this is actually my new venture, my new exercise baby, to really bring this framework out there and to solve this problem once and for all. And basically, we can enjoy the benefits, the convenience, the security, and everything that comes with the promise of biometrics without having to deal with the risk of identity theft and breaches and hacks, and really reducing and eliminating that liability. And that's ultimately, I think, the spirit of GDPR and all of the other data protection laws, right? They were always saying like privacy by design, minimize what you have, try not to store anything. How do just do the minimum. But that always would cause a conundrum with the agencies that had to do KYC, that had to do strong authentication. How do you deliver those services? Right. And so with these new frameworks, with what we're doing at Anonybit, I think we're really, for the first time, able to answer the call, privacy and security for biometrics and identity.
Right. I think now is a good time to welcome your baby into this world and to actually explore your work in the space. Could you perhaps tell us what exactly is Anonybit and what's the fundamental problem that you're trying to solve?
So, Anonybit is a privacy-first platform for managing and securing biometrics and personal data. We are essentially, instead of relying on the features and the distances between features in order to create a template and then do an authentication, our question was, what if you didn't have a template, but you could still do biometric authentication? What if there was no centralized system? What if there was no place for a fraudster or a hacker to get into, but you could still make sure that somebody is who they claim to be in whatever interaction they have? And that is, that is what we've done. So the decentralized framework, instead of relying on templates and dealing with the problems associated with template management, our approach essentially breaks down the biometric information into anonymized bits. That's why the name of the company is Anonybit. Mm-hmm. And we use these bits, we store these bits throughout a multi-party computing system of nodes, where they are kept and they're never retrieved. We never bring anything back together again. We never reconstruct anything. So there is no single point of failure, and there's nothing for a hacker to find and nothing to steal. So then the next question is, okay, so then how are you doing the matching? Right. If there's no template, it's like, wait a minute, I don't get it, because it's like a totally different, approach to handling and managing and doing, biometrics. So, so what we're doing is we have different types of nodes. We have storage nodes, we have mapping nodes, and we have computation nodes. So when we break down the biometric information into these anonymized bits, they go to the storage nodes where they're kept, and these nodes can be anywhere that an Anonybit service is being run. And these anonymized bits are tiny, meaningless pieces of information. If somebody somehow picks that up, it doesn't mean anything. It's not connected. It's not connected actually to any of the other features. It's like an independent, meaningless piece of information, like a crumb. Right. And so when you actually want to do a match, the system breaks down the biometric into these anonymized bits again, maps it out in the same way. And then these computation nodes kick into gear, and they handle the measurement of each bit in comparison individually, and then reconciles all of the mathematical computations in order to determine the authentication. And so this is the breakthrough, where we're able to do both the storage and the matching in a distributed manner. And you can't do this on the blockchain with biometrics or in other types of. And there's been attempts. I mean, this is not a new problem, to solve. There's been many attempts, and it's the first time that we've actually been able to overcome the challenges.
Right. You earlier alluded to the fact that traditional biometric modeling almost always requires a biometric template. Could you perhaps elaborate on what a biometric template actually is? And does Anonybit bypass this requirement? Is Anonybit compatible with every biometric algorithm out there?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, there in the Anonybit system, there is no template. There's nothing for fraudster to find, and there's nothing for a hacker to steal. And the system completely anonymizes the biometric information and distills it into these anonymized bits. And that's essentially how the system has overcome the challenges by distributing the matching at a bit level, if you will, as opposed to having to have the template in a full form. And I should have mentioned that the attempts to do this in the past failed because not because of the distribution of the information, but when the time came to reconstruct a lot of or even at the encryption level, a lot of the information would be lost. Features would not necessarily line up properly. And ultimately the mathematics of measuring failed. And if it did work, to reconcile everything, it took way too long. Right. So, in the world of authentication, you're talking like under a second. And if it's not seamless, it doesn't, when I say it doesn't work, I mean both in terms of, time and in terms of accuracy. So it needs to be, practical. And right. This is actually a problem that I've known about since 2007, when some governments, recognized that having their citizen information in a national database was not necessarily a good idea. And there have been numerous attempts, that I'm personally aware of, to try to decentralize. And I think we're only, like I said, this is a breakthrough that will address that.
So in our last episode, Dr. Harry Behrens had an interesting comment where he mentioned that identity is a means but not an end. I'm curious to know, can your technology be applied beyond biometrics? So what are the potential use cases that are made possible by Anonybit?
So Anonybit essentially supports all the use cases across what we call the digital identity lifecycle. When it comes to doing KYC, which is exploding right now, the storage of all of that personal data that's being collected through all of these KYC processes, where is that going? Where is that information being held? So Anonybit essentially can act as a secure identity vault, right? For managing that information. And then secure authentication, authentication for digital transactions, which there are numerous, right? We usually think about banking or healthcare, but we pretty much are logging into every application that we use today, even social media and games. So right. That means that all of those companies are essentially, holding personal information, and they too are, at risk for a breach. So any entity, whether it's something serious as, gaming, as banking, or as fun as TikTok, all of these entities essentially are still managing some kind of personal information, and they're trying to authenticate their users. So securely authenticating and making sure that people are who they claim to be in a way that doesn't compromise their security, their privacy or their security. So any application for secure authentication is for sure a use case for Anonybit. Anonybit, interestingly enough, can also be used to store non-biometric information. You can use the framework to store crypto keys, secrets, private keys for blockchain applications, master passwords. So tons of information that is sensitive, that is private, that should be stored in a vault, so to speak. But the catch here is that we're using the biometric to allow the person to retrieve it. So for all those crypto holders in the audience, that 25% of them that don't remember the passwords to their crypto account, imagine that your information, your password could be stored in a decentralized vault, just like your cryptocurrency is, and then you use your biometric, to retrieve that. I think that would make those people very, very, very happy that they're not letting all of that money, sit and languish. So that would be, the third one. And then there are tons of other applications leveraging the platform to send one-time passwords, to resolve tokens for payments. There are tons and tons of other business services, ongoing KYC or AML checks, merchant ID applications. So tons and tons of business services that where the blockchain is not applicable for whatever reason. Anonybit provides that alternative, secure and privacy-first framework for storing and managing all kinds of personal data. And finally, we can't. We can't leave out what's going on with vaccine passports and healthcare today, which has been. This is an area that has been quite behind, if I might say, in terms of the use of biometrics. We see a lot more in the financial world for obvious reasons, and in government and travel applications. But the state of play with COVID and where we are with issuing vaccine passports and health passports, I think they're called biopassports that say that that you had a negative test. Really adds an important layer of identity management and identity protection in there that really can't be ignored. So I think the time is now, for the healthcare industry to apply some of these concepts and lessons learned from other industries and put them into these frameworks for securing these new credentials and these new digital applications that they have to support. So it's a great opportunity.
Right. You earlier mentioned about the privacy by design framework, and I would like you to perhaps double click on this concept, so to say. Could you perhaps explain what exactly do you mean by privacy by design, and why is it the need of the hour today?
So we see a lot of companies, not just IBM. There's many companies that are, and governments, that are thinking about how to issue vaccine passports. And there's a lot of concern on the integrity of the issuing authority. This is a global thing, not necessarily what IBM is doing here. But, globally, there's a lot of concerns both on the integrity, because there's so many different players, private, industry, as well as public. So the integrity of the actual passports and documents that are being issued. Much of it is because these, at least in the United States, I'll give you the U.S. perspective, and then we can do the global perspective. But the U.S. does not have an identification framework. A lot of people don't even have IDs, not because they don't have access to them, but because they don't want them, or because this is not a priority for them. We also obviously have a lot of undocumented people in this country that are afraid to step forward to get IDs, but are still, entitled to get a vaccine. So in this country, we have a big problem because these vaccine cards and even the vaccine applications and passports are not bound to a rooted identity. We actually don't know when somebody presents these apps or these cards that they're issued to that person. And then even if they are issued to the person who is, claiming their identity, when you go and use them, there is no biometric on them or connected to them. So we actually don't know if the person is, the bona fide holder. And to me, this is really just a recipe for a public health and public safety disaster if we are going to be relying on these documents to reopen society. Because I could give you my Excelsior pass and, you're going to just flash it and nobody will know. I could give you my information to get one. And this could be amongst friends, but it could also have, real nefarious consequences. So I think we need to really understand, just like, the system of passports, have standards and we know that if somebody presents a passport, that they've gone through some kind of a vetting process per the ICAO standard, and the document itself is secure. And when it comes to this is just one example. There are other standards that are being proliferated around vaccine passports. ICAO is one, but there are others. I'm not picking. I'm not here to say one is better than the other,
right.
But I think that the one thing that they have in common is that, at least outside the U.S., is that they could be bound to a rooted identity, and you could manage a biometric authentication process if you wanted to. And then you can then ask the other question, okay, well, where is all of that information ultimately residing? Even if I'm showing a health passport, that means that somebody somewhere still has a registry, still has all of this information. And then we're back to, the privacy by design and decentralizing that honeypot of information. So that's what I'm saying, that I think in the healthcare arena, there's a real opportunity to really leapfrog a lot of these privacy and usage concerns by decentralizing the registries, so that there's nothing for anybody, so that won't be stolen or hacked. And obviously, we know that just like biometrics is very, very, very sensitive data, health information is also extremely, extremely sensitive for other reasons. And so decentralizing all of that information, I mean, we have a real opportunity here, to decentralize those registries and to ensure the integrity of the system and the credentials that are being issued, as well as to use these credentials with secure biometrics in order to ensure that they're used properly. And if I come across, extra passionate about this, it's because I do feel like there wasn't a lot of, because we were in the middle of an emergency, a lot of things just kind of like were put out there without full thought as to the implications. But I do believe that there is still time to do this properly. And not just, put it out there. There are, in the United States, there are pharmacies, there are government agencies, there are nonprofit organizations that are all now in the business of issuing vaccines and vaccine passports. They should be given, standards to follow to ensure that people really are who they claim to be, and that these things are not just going to be handed out like hotcakes.
Absolutely. So coming back to Anonybit, you mentioned the term decentralized quite a few times, and more often than not, the term decentralized is almost always associated with blockchain technology. So when it comes to decentralized biometrics and Anonybit's technology, I'm just curious to know, did you ever consider blockchain during the development of Anonybit?
So the reason that we developed Anonybit with the structure that we did is that you cannot do the biometric matching on the blockchain. You will not hear much about biometric matching and processes on the blockchain. You will hear a lot about storing credentials on the blockchain or using blockchain pointers to the actual credential that may be somewhere else. And the blockchain is really like releasing the key to provide the access to the credential that is stored in a central honeypot somewhere.
Right.
But you will not hear about the actual processing happening on the blockchain, which is what you need for biometric authentication. So for us, that wasn't really an option. And there are certainly, other. This is where the multi-party computing and machine learning and other concepts went into what we developed. Zero knowledge proof was another one. So we actually to create our infrastructure, we actually borrowed from multiple frameworks in order to make it work for biometrics.
Right, and I'm curious to know when is Anonybit actually going to be coming in?
So we're actually starting to deploy, and it's very interesting. The deployments are in very broad range of use cases and applications, which supports, what I was saying around, the need for everywhere for, protecting privacy and ensuring the integrity of interactions. We are seeing applications for securing passwords, storing master passwords in the Anonybit infrastructure and using the biometric to invoke it and to retrieve it. We see blockchain applications actually where they want to store the private key on our system, and again ensure that only the bona fide person is releasing that private key. Crypto applications where they want to ensure that the KYC mechanism is bound to the authentication mechanism, because today those processes are broken. Access control applications where the entities don't want to build huge repositories of visitor databases. They just, it's like a hot potato. Nobody wants to hold information anymore. Gaming, everybody is subject to GDPR, and they're afraid of, breaches. And government agencies that have already experienced their own breach in the U.S., we over 5 million people are still suffering today from a breach that happened, 5 years ago, where fingerprints, were stolen. The fallout is real, and we're seeing a lot of these securing vaults and a lot of these other vaults that are being created. People are realizing that you can't use a password or even two-factor authentication to secure, other like loan documents or things like this. So the implications are wide, and we're seeing that as we roll out.
Right. So in this podcast, we do things differently. Frontier Talk not just explores the intersection of identity and technology, but also people, the frontiers who are actually driving this ecosystem. Our next segment is called Frontier Fire, where I pose a series of rapid-fire questions to our guests on the show. So Frances, you roughly have around 30 seconds to expand on any answer you might give today. So are you ready for the challenge?
I'm ready.
Perfect. Let's get started. What's your mantra in life?
So I have a plaque sitting on my desk, and it says, "Life is not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about dancing in the rain." And this is essentially what's carried me through. And the sun always comes out shining the next day.
Great. What's the best piece of career advice that you ever received?
One door opens another. So, but it's up to you to walk through the doorway.
Super inspiring. I now want to shift the focus on diversity in tech. In recent times, the tech industry has put some effort in promoting and increasing diversity in the space. However, such initiatives don't seem to work, at least not yet. In your view, should the focus be on equality of outcome or equality of opportunity?
Equality of opportunity. I've done tons of work in the developing world, And I see it actually in my own backyard. There's a big, a lot of debates around diversity and opportunity, and ultimately, it's not fair to anyone if you put people that are not set up for success in a system that is going in a different direction. So in my mind, we have to set people up for success, and we have to do the foundation, and then they will walk through those doors.
And finally, what's your advice to anyone listening to this podcast?
So my advice, so this is a podcast of, people interested in AI and blockchain and decentralized identity. My advice is essentially to look beyond the status quo. Because there's a lot of things happening in the world of AI and decentralized identity that don't necessitate the trade-offs between privacy and security that we had until now. And so we need to step out of our comfort zone with biometric templates and think about, new frameworks and how to solve problems that, really, really protect our society.
Frances, it was an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. This was a fascinating primer on biometrics, and on behalf of our audience, I personally would like to thank you for making all of us smarter. I wish you and Anonybit the best of luck, and I hope to hear a lot more from you in the coming years. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Raj. Take care. Hope to talk to you soon.
That was Frances Zelazny. Frances will be speaking at the European Identity and Cloud Conference, EIC, and you can get your tickets via the link in the description box below. I'm also excited to announce that Frontier Talk is now live on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so go on and stream it from your favorite platform. I hope you enjoyed this conversation on all things biometrics, and if you did, please go on and share this with anyone who might find this information useful. And until next time, this is me, Raj Hegde, hoping to see you all again on this journey to redefine the I in identity. Stay safe, stay happy. Cheers.